for Reed and I to give you some idea of how this escapade started. Um, I had lived in Spain for a year on an academic sabbatical, and we did Christmas at Santiago, but we didn't really know about the Camino, which is somewhat surprising. But Reed and I talked, and I convinced him, hey, let's do this. And then we practiced. We carried bottles of water around in backpacks, and we were very motivated to do it. And then we did it. So Reed, how did we do such a crazy thing?
I think I'm unmuted, am I not? How did we do this, Jonathan? I don't know. Just by way of background, John and I, we've been friends since college. We went to the same university in Boston, and we also lived nearby in New Jersey, suburbs of Princeton. And when Smith had returned from his sabbatical, he's talking about the Camino. He and his family had gone to visit the town of Santiago. And so we started looking into it, and it became kind of almost like a buddy road trip kind of idea of doing this kind of adventure, and both of us being at a point in our lives where we could take the time to do it. Being, I guess, I would say Smith is more of a maximalist than me, but he said, well, why don't we do the whole thing? Many Europeans will do it in segments, since the entire Camino from the traditional beginning at Saint Jean Pied de Pau, which is the mountain pass town in the French Pyrenees, is the starting point traditionally. It's where all the trails and pathways converge in France to this one spot to enter Spain. And so he said, well, why don't we start there and go all the way, which is 800 kilometers. And I said, that seemed like a crazy idea to me, but it was also an adventure, and it was also a way to explore and deepen our understanding of history and of our Catholic faith, and to immerse ourselves in a part of the world that I really didn't know anything about.
Well, great. So why don't we take them through a little bit of this? And there's a map that shows the walk at the on the front of the first slide, but we've got more detail in the presentation. So let's go to the next slide. So these are the things that why Santiago de Compostela. The beheading happened in Jerusalem, I guess, and they took his body to Spain because he had been preaching there, and a farmer was led by a star, the Compostela, to the place that his remains were, and a bishop confirmed that it was indeed the remains of Santiago. They built a cathedral, and it's been, a major pilgrimage site. There are ways to reach it from all over Europe since the 9th century. But there are multiple Caminos, but we did the main one in terms of popularity and in terms of infrastructure, which was the Camino de Francis. So as Reed said, it started in France. And could you go to the next slide? Um, so um, uh, today we're going to focus on I think what Reed and I got out of it, because I think that at least Reed, I feel this way. You know, we had been, you know, we had been friends for most of our lives, and it was just interesting walking together. You know, sometimes in silence for 3 hours, and then you know deep conversations, and then reflection. So um, it was really pretty fantastic. Um, why don't we go to the next slide? So Reed, what was the route like?
The route was varied. Uh, the the first part of the trip was through the Pyrenees, and then through the area around Pamplona, which is very hilly, not mountainous, but hilly. The Pyrenees was kind of the big shock to the system because we had to traverse the Pyrenees Mountains on the first day. And in fact, when we finally got to our destination and I got to the place where we were staying, I wasn't sure the next day when we woke up if I'd be able to walk again. But it worked out fine. We had done enough training, but the Pyrenees was it was a 30-kilometer excursion from Saint-Jean-Pierre-de-Port to Roncesvalles, which is just on the Spanish side of the border, and the major town over there. And so it took us, I don't know, Smith, it was like 12 hours to traverse the Pyrenees.
Yeah, it was a tough walk because you know we weren't used to it, um, and we were pulling our rain gear off and on because you know it started raining when we were getting up to that first coffee shop at Horizon.
Yeah,
So
that's right. That's true. And it was, and the weather was it was very hot when we started out, and when we got to the higher elevations, we had to I put on every piece of clothing that I brought in my backpack because it was cold. And but it was an exhilarating. You'll see from some of the slides the the pictures of the place are just stunning topography.
so why don't we go on through, um, so um, we've outlined um, you know like five blocks, and we can go through them relatively quickly. Um, uh, why don't Reed, you do the first one, I'll do the sacred art, you do the Marian devotion, I'll do the it's a pilgrimage, not a hike, and then we'll close with Santiago.
Okay. Could you do the next slide, Father? Thank you. And the next one after that. This is a part of a poem from Gerald Manley Hopkins, which I thought was very appropriate. And I think one of the things about that region of the world, northern Spain, it's a beautiful landscape, and it's just astonishing the natural as part of these travels. And when you're on a pilgrimage and walking, it's a very different experience. I've never really done anything like this where we've taken a block of 34 days and lived, you know, day to day, getting up in the morning and walking to the next town as that's the thing for the day. And it was very different way to experience the world that we live in, you know, versus hopping in the car and whizzing along an interstate, listening to music or the radio, a radio show. and to really be in the place you are. And Smith had a very good saying about our trip was like be at the place where you are. And so it was so we experienced time in a very different way as well, and that really helped us kind of take in and appreciate the beauty and the grandeur of the world we live in. And I think I think the next slide has a picture or two. And this is from the Pyrenees, and this is one of many scenes from the Pyrenees Mountains. The next slide, please. And this is around the province of Navarre, and where the land kind of flattens out into rolling hills, and it's just and here we have like long vistas and beautiful places. Next slide, please. And this is a photograph that Smith took in what's called the Meseta. It's the region of the country between the Pyrenees mountain range and the Cantabrian Mountains. And it's basically the plains. It's the Spain's version of Iowa. And that town there is Castelleras. And what's interesting about Spain, unlike the States, is that the farm towns, everybody lives in the town, and the land is all kept outside. Castelleras was also a town that was founded during the Reconquista, where they provided land to people as an incentive to resettle the areas after they had pushed the Muslim armies to the south. And that was something that we kind of encountered in our walks, in that aspect of history. Next slide, please. And here we are. These are the Cantabrian mountain ranges, and that was as we got closer to Compostela. We got back into the mountains, and there was we stayed in one town. It looked like it could have been right out of Ireland, and the topography and the climate and the whole aspect of it. It was really remarkable. Next slide, please. And you're walking through the woods and through fields, and it was just a remarkable experience. And from this picture, there's no one in this picture, but there were many people on the Camino, which was a surprise to me, and many young people, which is quite surprising. And I was encouraged, and as we were walking, and we met so many people, because people were open to talking and friendly. And it was a great kind of experience. I guess suffering does have an ability to, bring people together. But we were all pilgrims, more or less. The distinctions among people were minimized, and we were pilgrims on a journey.
So a question came in, which is, where did we stay? Well, we arranged with a tour company to set us up in hotels. So we didn't do it the pure way, which is basically you stay in hostels, or even tents. I'm kind of old enough that I'd rather stay in a reasonable place. And I think Reed coined the expression, it's a pilgrimage, not a penance. So yeah, that's the answer to that. Let's look at some art. So this is Burgos, which is a magnificent cathedral. Couldn't take any photos inside, but it was awesome. Next slide, please. Leon, I think, had probably the best stained glass on the route, and I like glass. So this is a classic flying buttress Gothic, and it was magnificent. Next. So, looking at the rose window from the outside, you could tell it was massive. But going inside next, it was gorgeous. And so uh, one of the things that is tremendous about the art is it's inspiring because it was a communications method for people who couldn't read. So the stories were told with pictures, and you can see they were told beautifully and well. Next slide, please. Um, this is still in Lyon. I didn't get the light quite right here, but I think you get the sense of airiness because it was so high. Um, one of the characteristics of the Gothic architecture is basically you can hang big sheets of glass, and so it's just mind-boggling to be in there. Next. So there are many altars. I think they call these retablos.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's vast amounts of information here. So a lot of this is real gold, but some of the figures are what are called polychromes. They're painted, but the amount of handwork that this represents is absolutely astounding. And one of these buildings, and it's why we view it as a work of art, could have taken over 100 years to build, and it was the major focus of many people. Next. We particularly like this little church. There were some German priests repairing it, and as you could see, the walls are falling apart and stuff like that. But we had a most wonderful mass in there. So oftentimes, when we got to a town, we'd look around for the pilgrim mass to cap off our day. Typically, it'd be about 7 p.m. and then we'd go back and crack a bottle of wine and eat. But there's a very strong foundation of faith as you walk the Camino. Next, please. So stonework is fantastic. This is essentially a stone coffin, and the woman's face looks to me quite lifelike. Next. Very delicate stonework, but stone. Next. These are polychromes. Basically, they're wooden, but I think what they do is they put like tons of like a plastic paint on them, so they last a long time. And as you can see, they're quite communicative as art. Next. So there, of course, were many images of Jesus. In particular, we all of those little green things are notes that that were left there. Um, so next, um, paintings. Um, we found lots of examples of of painted art where you felt the person was live and looking right into you. I mean, really good stuff. And obviously, painted um, with with the attempt to communicate. Next, uh, tapestry is a little worn out, but still impressive in detail and scale. Next. This was on the roof of the Santiago Cathedral, so I got a little bit ahead of myself, but that's a cross that moved around a lot through Spain, and they had it, stored, in some sense on the roof of the cathedral. Um, these these doors show the story of Santiago in the boat and getting his head cut off and stuff like that. So, a lot of the art, as I mentioned previously, is storytelling. Next. They mixed metal and stone with the idea of creating objects of permanence and beauty. Next. Reed, over to you. You got to unmute.
Sorry. Mary was a big feature of the landscape, both outside and inside the church. The image on the left is the Our Lady of Orison, which we were very happy to see her because it was the first rest stop in the Pyrenees. And I should mention, Jonathan had a friend and a colleague from Spain who accompanied us on the first 7 days of our trip, and it was a wonderful thing. Number one, he was fluent in Spanish. He also spoke Basque, so we could get something to eat on the first night. And he also helped us to navigate the mountain part of our journey by coaching us on how to rest and how to use our sticks and walk downhill. So that's the Virgin of Orison on the left, and the image on the right is Our Lady, who is on the top of the altar, the covering of the altar in Roncesvalles. And the picture doesn't really do the image justice, and it's hard to describe what it's like to see it. She's placed on top of a silver tent. I'm not sure what the liturgical term is for that piece of structure, but that's Roncesvalles. And next slide, please. The image on the left is a very famous early image of Mary from the 11th century. And the image on the right is a more 19th century a picture of her. Next slide, please. Thank you. Mary on the left is in Najera, and on the right is a more primitive, I'm not sure where that is, but it's the seat of wisdom image of Mary. Next slide, please. And then we have the grand outside stone entrance of a church, Mary welcoming you at the door, and then an intimate portrait that's from the Burgos Cathedral Art Museum, which is about the size of the Philadelphia Art Museum in terms of its medieval art collection. Um, and so that's just one small, almost 6-inch round, beautiful rendering of Mary and the child Jesus on the right. Next, please. And then the different media. Thank you.
So, I think, it really is a pilgrimage, not a hike. I felt, Reed, that we forged our friendship more deeply across more different aspects of our lives, basically because like you said, we were out of time. We were disconnected from ordinary life, and we were trying to make it. Part of the trick is preserving your feet, not getting sick, because, the goal is to make it. Part of a pilgrimage is getting to the destination. So we put a lot of brain power and energy into that, and, we did make it. I found that I spent a lot of time in prayer, and that is a very useful thing when you're going up a hill that you can't get up. Just keep praying, and you make it. So we did it. So could we go to the next slide? So this was halfway up on the French side of the Pyrenees, the first break, and wow did we need it. So we talked with people. People were complaining. People were excited. And as Reed said earlier, a lot of it has to do with interaction with other pilgrims. People were trying to find new lives. People's stories were fascinating. So next slide, please. This was the top of a very tall hill, and so metal work up there. Next slide. So a lot of time is taken up just taking a break, because a rest is very important. Getting your boots off and keeping your feet aerated is important. And the chance to meet other people. Let's see, I think I remember the woman with the sunglasses on the right is French. I think the three people on the left were from Brazil. And I think that's my coffee and my glucose meter sitting on the table. So next slide, please. There were, as you always have in Trump and yours, so people would understand about where you'd get tired and they'd park a truck there. And I would frequently have a beer for breakfast, and the trucks had beer. So that was good. Next. This was an interesting crew. They were traveling around in a bus. It was a family. and they were the friendliest people. They invited us to sit with them. Um, I don't think they were into the kind of full, carry the backpack, but they were having a fantastic time. And I think the Americans entertained them. This was a very famous restaurant, and we read about it in the guidebook, so we decided to eat there. And they invited us to sit with them. It was great. Next, and then of course we we attended as many pilgrim masses as we could. Um, I've never figured out what that line is in the photograph. So because I haven't, I present it to you. It was a very interesting photo. So next, I think that to basically close off the it's a pilgrimage, not a hike. We wanted to summarize some of our thoughts. I mentioned the discussion and silent reflection as we were walking, but one of the things that Reed pointed out that was very important to us is that we also got, we realized that we were all in this together. And so, there, as always, the young think they're invulnerable. So there was this woman who apparently was a ballerina. I think, we found out she was a ballerina, but apparently her ability to stand on her toes didn't help her with her hiking boots. So she had big blisters. So, we gave her moleskin and aspirin that we had because we were well equipped because we're paranoid. And then this was the saddest thing in some sense was there was this college kid, and she was lying on a bench, and we asked her what was going on, and she probably figured we were pesky old men, but it's basically we could tell she was in pain, and so she kind of didn't really want to deal with us. So we said, okay, well, that's fine. But then we went down the hill. And this was something where I was feeling like we got to help that kid. So I finally, Reed and I were going back and forth, and we basically probably walked back, I don't know, half a kilometer, Reed?
Yes, you made me go back. I was very upset at the time. And I had to carry, I don't remember if I carried the kid or the pack, but it was a long way to the town. And we were old guys.
Well, but we did the right thing.
We did the right thing.
We did the right thing because that kid's knees were a wreck. And when we saw her, I think the next day she was so thankful because she was getting some knee braces. So I think that getting into that mindset was very meaningful and very important. And as I mentioned, the pilgrim masses were well attended. So next, over to you, Reed.
Oh, do you want me to answer some of the questions that are coming up from the chat line, maybe?
Well,
you want to wait to the end?
Let me see what's up there. Yes, you could do it by bicycle. Uh, um, uh, People do it that way, but typically there's a different bike route. You can do it by horse, um, but we didn't see a lot of people doing that. Um, but I think that foot, bike, and horse are okay. Um, so, um, right.
As Smith mentioned, that we stayed every night at a hotel or a small inn, which ranged in from sort of luxe in the bigger towns and very simple in the country towns. Each place had like the basic shower facilities in a room, and was very very well turned out for what we needed. Just basically needed a place to sleep for 8 or 9 hours so we could do it again. And the meals, the pilgrim meals, were provided by either the inn or by a nearby restaurant, and were part of the package and part of the program. And you would often eat your pilgrim meals with the other pilgrims that were staying in the place you were. And it was a great way to meet people. We met some wonderful Irish ladies, asked us if we were hill walkers, which I'd never heard of before, but it's hill walkers. And we the other thing about meeting the pilgrims along the way is you'd see them from time to time. From day 1, day 5, we saw some people that we had started out with on June 1st, at the end of June as we were approaching Santiago, and then in early July when we were there. So the places of accommodation, it ranged, and it took us 34 days in total to walk, and we walked every day. We did take a cab 2 or 3 times to do some side excursions. We went to Yuso and Susa, which are important from Spanish history places. And we went to a Cistercian monastery, which is really a fabulous thing. But for the most part, we walked 90% of the travel. So that was 800 kilometers. And we did it in June. So I think they already answered that question. Sorry. So go ahead, Smith.
Sure. Well, we got to Santiago, and the cathedral is magnificent, but again, a lot of it is storytelling, and so so since it's storytelling, they do it in stone. Next slide. And it is a Romanesque cathedral, so it doesn't have all the light. They use the Roman arch, which is very strong, so they put it high up, but there's not the level of light that you get with the Gothic. But it's a very interesting setup. That those pipes coming out are the organ coming into the center of the cathedral, and the altar is way down the barrel. That photo is on the left is the Compostela at the top of the altar. Next slide. We managed to get there at the right time for some good light. This is I think I did something that drives people crazy. I got on my back and shot up for stability. But you know, the fact that they built this incredible building without powered cranes, donkeys, mechanicals. It is mind blowing. So next, you can go behind this image of Santiago and put your hands on his shoulder. So people do that. They go behind him. Next. The polychromes, as usual, are tremendous, and the altar is tremendously ornate, as you'd expect from such an important place. Next. Reed, I think you took this image.
Yeah, I think that was with my camera phone. One of the things about the Camino at the Mass, at the Pilgrim Mass we went to along the way, we would sing the Salve Regina, and that was in the Latin, so everyone could sing. And I saw this image, and I thought of that, you know, that song that's sung at the end of the Pilgrim Mass. It's and it was done in the most humble of parish churches, in, you know, the Grand Cathedral at Lyon.
Good.
And it's a very intimate piece of art. Yeah, there's just so many different aspects of art going on in at Santiago, as well as the other churches. It's a feast for the senses. It's astonishing the spiritual imagination of the people who rendered these pieces of art. You know, and the sacrifice in the industry to, you know, to generate this these things that are still beautiful and moving today.
This is a shot I took in the crypt. It was hard. There wasn't a lot of light, and but the you know, the crypt is incredible, and not surprisingly, you know, for Santiago, the artwork and the metallic coffin, I believe it's silver, you know, are beautiful. Next. This is way up in the top of one of the domes, and this is a frequent image that you see, the eye of God looking down upon you, and I think the last slide is the end. Yes. So my understanding was that that there was going to be another person talking about their Camino. So I think, you know, we could maybe take one question and then let Isabel talk. Hi.
Hi, that sounds good. Did anyone want to ask a question first, or shall I jump in?
There weren't questions, they were mostly comments. So why don't you take over?
Okay. So I do not have a fancy PowerPoint, but I do have some photos to share, and I'm going to attempt to share those with you all. Oh, I can't share my screen. Father Heisen, could you let me share my screen?
Yes, I can make you host.
Okay.
So let me find you first. Here.
Give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm taking a minute. I'm usually actually quite good at sharing my screen. I don't know what's going on now. So if people want to ask questions or if you want to discuss a little bit more of your Camino, go for it. I'm really
Oh,
sorry.
when did you go?
I went last year.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I went on my own. I actually had thought that I was going to meet a friend in St. Jean, but it turns out that at the very last minute, she couldn't make it. So I was literally like on the bus from St. John, or from Pamplona up to St. John, and my friend calls me and says, I'm not coming. So it was a big surprise. Okay, do people see a screen?
Yes.
Oh, hooray. Okay. Anyways, it was this, do you just see my photos, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, you don't see any supplemental notes or materials. Sorry, that's a paper I'm writing, not something you need to see.
Well, you might want to do full screen for the photos.
Yeah, let me see if I can get that. Or at least like, slideshow. Maybe not with the music in the background.
Well, if you just if you click on one photo and then you go up to the upper left and click on the green dot there, that should work.
Perfect. I'm usually not this bad at Zoom, but anyways, today is just not my day. Anyways, I went last year. Like I said, a friend of mine was intending to meet me, and she couldn't at the last minute, so I decided to just do it by myself. I was woefully unprepared to go by myself. I thought I was going to go with this friend of mine, but she didn't show, so I didn't really have everything I needed because I thought she was going to have stuff. But I still did it, and I loved every minute of it, and I would strongly, strongly recommend it. I think, some people are concerned about doing it alone. Some people might be concerned about doing it as a woman or someone who might be in a position where they don't feel very confident about doing it by themselves. And I can tell you that it is perfectly safe. In the many, many, many years of recent history and pilgrims, there's only been one really severe incident that's occurred, and I won't tell you the details. You can find it on the internet. But I think that's saying a lot about the Camino. There are certainly precautions you can take, and I'm happy to talk more about those, but for the most part, you should totally do it. I didn't do the whole way, so I'm sort of doing things in the way that was mentioned earlier, the piecemeal approach, where you sort of do a couple weeks at a time, and then you eventually make your way to Santiago years later. You go to one place, you leave Spain, then you come and back to Spain, you pick up right where you left off. So I have stopped at Logroño. I've crossed the Pyrenees and gone into Logroño. Also, to be clear, as you can probably imagine, I did the French way. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this. And actually, it would be kind of helpful to hear who has actually done parts of the Camino. Maybe if you've done some of the Camino, you can bring that up in the chat and share your experiences. But there are lots of different ways to get to Santiago. And so the French way is the most popular one because historically that was the way that most of the European pilgrims got to Santiago, right? Whereas the other ways, the Portuguese way was like just for people coming in from Portugal. The Southern way was from people coming from Southern Spain. The original way, which is the hardest one, which is from Oviedo to Santiago, that was basically done by this one king who was known to be the original pilgrim to Santiago. And anyways, and that's like just a 3-week hike, but extremely difficult. The French way, though, because it connects into the rest of the European continent, is historically the one that has been kind of the most traversed. So that's what I did as well. That's what I'm doing to get to Santiago eventually. Of course, the landscapes are really wonderful. I was especially moved by the gorgeous Pyrenean landscapes that we saw earlier at this. You can see how you're really above the clouds when you're hiking through the Pyrenees, and it's just fantastic. It's wonderful to think about the many, many pilgrims that have gone before you and that have walked that same way. And what's cool about the experience too is not only you think about the people who have gone before you, but you're also walking in the same direction as everyone else. So I'd never done a hike like that, right? Where I'm actually walking, every single person who's walking with me is walking in the same direction as me. That's a very kind of powerful experience and a very powerful image of what pilgrimage is. The landscape's also really diverse in just that northern part that I did, and I can't even talk about the central Meseta or sort of the Galician mountains and rain. There's a lot of rain as you get closer to Santiago. But it is quite diverse and really beautiful. Sometimes a little tricky to navigate the Camino. Mostly it's well paved or comfortable, but sometimes it's really kind of narrow and you feel like you need a machete. But anyways, I made it through. Of course, like Jonathan Reed said, that the religious imagery and architecture is fantastic and really, really interesting. So there were a lot of images that I had never come across and that are sort of unique to that region, those parts of northern Spain in the particular historical moments in which the Camino was developed. Largely 11th to 13th century, but with important addendums after that. So for example, I haven't, in my humble experience, have not been able to see the Trinity depicted very often as a statue. And so here we have God the Father on the right, God the Son on the left, and the Holy Spirit emanating behind them. To see that at the centerpiece of an altar was really unique to me. I also you don't see St. Joseph and the Child Jesus too often either. You often see Our Lady with the Child Jesus, and so it's cool to see this kind of image too. Lots of images of Santiago. This is Santiago dressed as a pilgrim. There's lots of images of pilgrims and lots of images of Santiago. This is Santiago as a pilgrim, which is like a sort of interesting way to think about Santiago. You imagine yourself, making a pilgrimage to him or to what is purportedly his tomb. We're actually not super sure, but what is purportedly his tomb. But then to think about him too as a pilgrim, I think is a really nice meditation. This is an altarpiece which very deliberately had the top row emphasize female saints, which I thought was pretty cool. This is an image of Christ's baptism. I hadn't seen that too often, and I thought that was interesting. You also see wonderful juxtapositions of art and architecture in the churches themselves. So in the same church, you'll see an early medieval crucifix, and you'll see something much later, something more dramatic. And the contrast is very, very striking. You can see the layers of history in the churches themselves. There are some problematic images, I will say, Santiago crushing the Moor. So of course you have to understand that the Camino was developed, sort of initiated at a time in which Spain was considered itself sort of defending Christendom and its territory against sort of Moorish invasion, and so that comes up a lot. You'll find them over here on the left crushing the Spaniards, and that also puts things in perspective too. Then there's some more modern or more recent addendums, which are also worth enjoying and contemplating, like the Stations of the Cross in Basque. I don't think there are many places that you can see the Stations of the Cross in Basque, and you get to see them on the Camino. And of course, lots of cool murals and graffiti art as well, celebrating the fact that the Camino still is this wonderful pilgrimage for people. Yeah, I love this one. For those of you who might not be familiar, on the Camino, you're given what's called kind of a passport note. Spiritual pilgrims and secular pilgrims can actually get different passports. I did not know that, so I got the secular passport. But if you want to really define yourself as a religious pilgrim, you can ask St. Pat's. You can ask your parish to procure a religious passport for you. And this is a little book that kind of confirms that you are making a pilgrimage and gives you access, I suppose, to a number of different hostels and places to stay and eat sometimes. Often gets you discounts places. But the kind of two cool pieces of this is, one, each place you go to will stamp your passport. And you'll see that on this man's kind of chest is a number of different stamps from very significant places along the Camino. And so it's wonderful to go back and look at your passport and see all the beautiful stamps that you've received. And then of course, once you get to Santiago de Compostela, you show your passport to the pilgrim's office to prove that you have in fact walked at least 100 kilometers of the Camino. And once you are able to demonstrate that by documenting all the places that you've been to and that they have in fact been walked for more than 100 kilometers, that will get you a beautiful certificate and document, which I'm sure Jonathan and Reed have some displayed somewhere. It's a real really rewarding moment, I hear, to get that. I don't have mine yet, obviously. And of course, I had to include the image of the Dominican convent in Pamplona, which I think is beautiful and actually was very important for me spiritually. You can see St. Dominic on the right there, but I almost stopped the Camino at this location, and then a Dominican told me to keep going, so I did. But another thing that I think is the real highlight of the Camino, especially for me, especially for someone who was walking alone, was just the enormous number of friends I was able to make on the Camino. We are still in touch. We talk it was the Feast of St. James on Saturday, so we were talking then. You meet people from all over the world, often over shared meals. I know that Jonathan and Reed mentioned this, but I just really want to emphasize how great it is that the hostels that you stay at usually also offer a communal pilgrim meal. And for me, I love to eat. So the fact that I can eat and make friends at the same time is just wonderful. So I loved the communal meals and always made a lot of good friends there. You sort of meet people at these meals, and then the next day you say, hey, do you want to walk together? And you start the walk together that day. And, maybe you'll walk for several days together. Maybe you'll walk for just a little while together and then find each other at another stop down another town down the road. It's really beautiful. People refer to all the friends that you make on the Camino as your Camino family. You don't always have to eat pilgrim food. You can, but you don't always have to. So we would, take breaks at bars and restaurants. And I will say that you eat really, really well on the Camino. So that was also fun too. But like I said, you don't have to. The hospitality that's offered to pilgrims is extraordinary. And the hospitaleros, as they say, the people who run a lot of the hostels, are so generous and so kind. Also people you can stay in touch with. This woman I was actually in touch with this weekend, she happened to be, by the grace of God, the cousin of a nun I know in Philly. So I didn't know that she was there. She didn't know that I knew her. I knew her cousin, but the Camino put us together, and now I WhatsApp with Sister Maria Sion. Anyways, the hospitaleros are wonderful because they really know how much you're walking and how much effort you're making. It is a lot of walking. You should definitely take rest days. Don't feel bad about that if you need to. There's this phrase that comes up in the Camino a lot, chacun son chemin, or cada uno su camino, to each his own camino. So you kind of walk what you can. If you want to do the big like 25-kilometer days, you can do that. If not, if you want to take a shorter day, you can do that too. Make sure you have your compi. This is like the signature Camino item, right? Yeah. Item, everyone. Multiple. Yeah, it's expensive, but worth it. And take care of your feet, and take rest, and make your own Camino. I would strongly recommend it. It's a beautiful experience. But perhaps some of you have your own experiences to share. I've noticed that there's been some activity on the chat, which I've missed.
Isabel, can you say something about the seashell?
I was trying to remind myself the story of the seashell, Father. The importance of the seashell today is that the seashell is sort of the symbol of the Camino. So this is the classic scallop shell, which you will see everywhere, and every pilgrim will have a seashell hanging on their backpack. It's a really cool way to mark yourself as a pilgrim, to connect with other pilgrims, and also to just get the sort of support of people on the Camino who are not making the way. People see that seashell and they have a lot of respect for it. It's really beautiful. It also will mark major places to stay. Historically, when the Camino was less, I suppose, formalized, the Camino really became, quick interjection, the Camino really became formalized actually in the post-Franco period. It's kind of a fascinating timeline. In the 11th and 12th centuries, the Camino was first developed because the tomb of St. James was reportedly discovered there. It becomes a major site of pilgrimage through like the 14th, 15th century, but then you get the Reformation, and it's really difficult to travel in Europe, especially on Catholic pilgrimages during the Reformation. So the kind of traffic on the Camino declines, and the Camino sort of falls into disarray for a while. Fast forward to 20th century Spain. Franco who was the authoritarian sort of dictator in charge of Spain from the period after the Civil War until the 70s. He was very committed to the idea of a national and Catholic Spain. And so he actually put a lot of money into reviving the Camino and put a lot of effort into formalizing it. The beautiful and poetic twist, though, is that once it was formalized and once it had been kind of built up again by the Francoist regime, it was the first people to do it, the first people kind of with the gumption to do it, were actually sort of late 60s, early 70s, more into later 70s, hippies, bohemians, and they would sort of come from outside of Spain because they heard there was this really cool hike that they could do in Spain, and they took advantage of Franco's development. I'm a political scientist, so I kind of love this story of two very different two groups of people that we would think of as being on very different sides of a political spectrum coming together and producing this actually beautiful gift for us. So that was a quick interjection just to say that prior to Franco's redevelopment of the Camino, it has been said that people who were willing to host pilgrims would put a scallop shell on their door to let pilgrims know that they could come and they could stay with them, or they could have a meal with them. And so the shell symbolized, marked key places in the Camino for pilgrims. So when there wasn't like, a Buen Camino app, which everyone should download because it's great, people would just look for the nearest, albergue with a scallop shell, and they would stay there. Why the scallop shell? We don't really know. Perhaps others can sort of illuminate on this topic. There's a bunch of different theories as to why the scallop shell was so important. I would say it has something to do with shipwreck, which is associated with the story of how Santiago came, the fact that Santiago de Compostela is located in Galicia, which is a place that's very connected to the sea. And I think there's a third one, but maybe I'm missing it. So I'm not really sure why exactly we have the shell as such a significant marker. There's a lot of different theories. There's no single origin story that I've heard consistently. But that's the symbol. Yeah.
Well, whatever the origin is, it's interesting that tradition has it. I mean, it's in tradition we baptize with a seashell, either a metallic seashell or an actual seashell. And the Father Tim actually started something here where whenever he goes to a beach, he'll collect shells and bring them here. And then we have a baptism. After the baptism, we'll actually give the parents the shell that the child was baptized with. And they're real seashells. So, and you can think of course, baptism as the beginning of your pilgrimage to eternal life. Well, thank you very much, Isabel, and thank you to Jonathan and Reed. So maybe any last questions do any of you have for any of them?
About the best time of the year to make this journey?
I think late spring, early fall. The summer, as Kathy just noted, is just too hot. It's punishing.
I would agree. Also, Kathy, I see that you did the Camino Primitivo, which is like the hardest one. Do you want to share any insights from that?
Maybe I'll let Taryn do it. Taryn, are you still here? But we did it together last September, and everyone says it's the hardest, but it's also a lot shorter, which is one of the reasons that we did it. Both of us are in middle age, and so therefore have some time, but not 6 weeks to get away from our jobs. So we did it in 11 walking days. Taryn, do you want to say something?
We had a wonderful trip. I would echo Isabel and encourage anyone who wants to try it and not be afraid to try it solo and to make it your own journey and walk as many miles as you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and there are other Camino routes that are not super long either. The Portuguese generally takes about 2 weeks to do as well. So if you want to do something but don't have 6 weeks to do it or 5 weeks to do it in, you know, there are some other shorter routes, and we met really interesting people along the way and had a very memorable experience. And Taryn was our photographer. She took great pictures.
Yeah, it's also worth mentioning that, again, you only need to do 100 kilometers to like get the Compostela. And so a lot of people start 100 kilometers out, sort of east of Santiago. A big stopping point is Sarriá, for example, and they'll walk those 100 kilometers to get the Compostela. But right, like Kathy and Taryn said, there are a number of other routes which can also be a little less touristy, I hear. That not that the Camino is very touristy, I actually found it pretty mild, but you know, where you can do the whole kind of traditional walk from start to finish in a shorter amount of time than it would take you to do the Camino Francés.
I remember a few years ago when the movie The Way came out, which is it's an interesting movie. I won't go into the details now, but if any of you haven't seen it, that might be a good one to see. It's all about, you see the whole journey of the Camino, and it's a secular movie with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez. And yeah, and one of the interesting things you see there is the mix of some people have religious motivations going on the Camino, and these days some people, it's not really a matter of faith, it's just kind of their own way of soul searching or going on an adventure. But it's kind of interesting to see people from all different walks of life meeting and their journeys meeting, and the interesting conversations that take place and the different places where people are in their lives.
Yeah, I would say that, Father, that's a great comment. Watching that movie, it gives you the real feeling of the comradeship and companionship of the Camino. And in my case, my daughter joined me for 10 of those days on the walk. And so, like the movie that had a father and son theme, we had a father and daughter theme for a part of the Camino. It was a really special experience.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and finish up? So I really appreciate you, the three of you, taking the time to share your experience with us. You know, I know a number of people who have been on the Camino. I've never been on it myself, but it's always been an incredible experience. I'm actually, on August 15th, I'll be celebrating a marriage of a man who proposed to his fiancée on the Camino. So that's kind of interesting. So why don't we go ahead and end with prayer? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time tonight, helping us to appreciate pilgrimages more deeply and the pilgrimage of life that we're all called to. And in particular, this pilgrimage to the tomb of St. James in Santiago de Compostela. We pray for all the pilgrims who go there and for all who are unable to go there, that you might somehow through our journeys, you might bring us closer to yourself. And we ask for the prayers of Mary, sort of the star of the sea and guide on our pilgrim way, and the prayers of St. Joseph, St. Patrick, St. Dominic, and St. James, and all the holy angels and saints. And we ask all of this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you all, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks again to our presenters. Thanks for everyone tuning in. And we hope you can join us next week.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye.
Good night, Father. Good night, everyone.